Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The May 15, 2007 special Joint City Council and Redevelopment Agency budget meeting is called to order. This meeting has been properly noticed and posted in compliance with the open meeting law. These proceedings are being presented live on KCLV Cable Channel 2 and are closed captioned for our hearing impaired viewers. This special council meeting, as well as all other KCLV programming, can be viewed on the internet at www.kclv.tv. The proceedings will be rebroadcast on KCLV Channel 2 and the web Thursday at 2 p.m., Sunday at 6 p.m., and Monday at 6 a.m. Would everyone please rise for the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Item number 1 is a public hearing and possible action regarding fiscal year 2008 City of Las Vegas Redevelopment Agency tentative budget and fiscal year 2008 City of Las Vegas Redevelopment Agency final budget. Item number 2 is a public hearing and possible action regarding fiscal year 2008 City of Las Vegas tentative budget and fiscal year 2008 City of Las Vegas final budget, including the 5-year capital improvement plan. These two items are both public hearings, and we'll take them together. The public hearings are now open. Dr. Selby.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. Today's budget hearing is your final opportunity to adjust the fiscal year 2008 budgets for the RDA and the City of Las Vegas before they're submitted to the state of Nevada. As always, the budget can be amended later, but what we're doing today really sets the tone and the standard by which we're going to judge the balance of the year. As we've reported at the past 3 meetings with you where we've discussed the budget, the current fiscal year and next fiscal year are presenting enormous challenges for us, things that we haven't seen in years past as a result of declining revenues. Unprecedented slow growth in the consolidated tax has had a chilling effect on our finances. Consolidated tax, which comprises 53% of our general fund revenues, has grown at less than 1% in fiscal year 2007, and we're forecasting a growth of only 4% in FY 2008. Additionally, we've discussed the fact that as a council, a lot of your ability to influence revenues has been limited by the legislature, so you don't have much discretion to maybe adjust revenues in terms of property taxes and other types of revenue income that we might be able to augment some of the loss with. That said, we believe that the slowdown is just an aberration, that there should be a turnaround in 12 to 18 months. There's a lot of optimism in the community. A lot of the folks in the development sector, a lot of the people who watch these things very closely are optimistic that the future will turn around, and maybe not to the levels of the double-digit increases that we've been seeing, but to a solid, sustained growth rate that allow us to resume adding new programs and expanding city services. But at this time, prudence dictates that we offer you a conservative budget, one that we've helped to carefully put together with your input to try to make it through this short-term aberration in revenues. I'm proud to say that given the revenue limitations, staff has been able to recommend adding some new positions. In fact, there are 27 new positions recommended for the general fund. Now, some of those are a result of taking old positions that have been vacant for quite some time and transitioning those to new positions that are needed. And others are a result of just cost savings that we've been able to identify within the future budget. There are also positions that are funded through the RDA, which is a separate revenue stream, and that one is a good, strong base of revenue growth. And through our enterprise funds, which, as you know, operate as kind of independent businesses generating revenue through their fees and charges. Additionally, as a result of the intensive workshops that we've had with the council, we've been able to identify additional funds for some capital programs. As you know from all of the workshops we've had, it's a tight year for new projects as well. But as a result of looking at existing projects, projects that basically weren't going to be built, excess funds left over from other projects, and idle funds that weren't going to be used immediately, we've been able to come up with about a $43 million improvement in new projects. So that will fund about 23 new projects, in addition to the projects that were already on the drawing boards, and I think they total something like $300 million. So we'll have a good sustained program of project development, although it'll be slower than in previous years. So if there are no questions for me, I'd like to invite Mark Vincent to come forward and give you the details of the budget.
I appreciate that, Dr. Selby. I do have a question, and you may not be in a position to answer it, but do we have any empirical kind of statement or data which would suggest that the economy is in fact going to turn around? Or is it all anecdotal with the developers saying that they believe it's going to come back and it's going to come back between 12 and 18 months? Are there any studies that would reflect that we are in fact going to be coming back in a robust manner? Maybe Mr. Vincent.
I see Mr. Vincent approaching as though he has the answer.
Mr. Vincent, are you able to comment on that?
Yes, Your Honor. Mark Vincent, for the record, Finance and Business Services. There are a lot of analysis that's out there that indicates that there is going to be an upturn. You use the word robust, though, and I question whether it will be robust. It'll be healthy. For example, we're looking at even our population growth is. As you become larger, the rate of growth slows down in terms of a percentage, but we're looking at about 2% growth in population for next year, which is maybe half of what we've seen in prior years. So I think the growth in revenues will upturn, but I don't think we're going to see double-digit growth real quick. There'd have to be something else phenomenal that would happen. We've talked at length about some of the issues with the legislature and some of the bills that are up there that address things like green buildings. There was another article today about the governor's veto, concerns about liability there. I think some of those are also key to how quickly the upturn comes back. Those are some large projects. We did some number crunching for the legislative group, just as an example. You talk about, let's assume the build-out for the 61 acres is $5 billion. The loss, the annual loss in revenue to the RDA because of a 50% rebate in property taxes would be almost $20 million a year.
That would be if the buildings were green.
Yeah.
Right, if the buildings were green.
Well, and that's part of the plan for
well,
the.
No, but I understand that.
Right.
I want them to be
Right.
green, and we, as
Right.
a council, want them to be green. But
so that's just an example. So if you could extrapolate that to some of the projects on the Strip.
Yeah, well, I'm more concerned about what's happening downtown. I mean, that really is outrageous.
We're getting a 7-foot center.
I understand, but he's out in the county.
Oh,
But be careful. Some of the rebates have to do with had to do with sales tax for materials, and that affects everybody in the county because we share in that through the consolidated tax formula. So, for those reasons, I think there will be an upturn, but I don't know that it'll be robust. It'll be healthier than you might see in other cities. But for what we've experienced the last 10 years since I've been here, the growth has really been pretty phenomenal.
No question about that.
Yeah. I might add that to a large degree, our revenues are impacted by the residential market. That's what's really slowed down.
Right.
It seems like commercial and other types of developments still are very robust in the community.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Mr. Vincent.
Thank you, Your Honor. Before we get started here, I'd like to just clarify that we have filed our tentative budget. You all have a copy of this. This was filed on April 15th. And what we're going to talk about today is changes that we have made as a result of the meetings that we've had, primarily in capital, but some of the positions that Dr. Selby talked about, we'll be talking about the changes to that. So as a quick recap, our total budget is going to be $1.4 billion. That's a slight decrease, in fact, from last year. We didn't put as much into our capital project plan as we had in years past. Last fiscal year, our budget was about $1.5 billion. Our city population, as I mentioned, is projected to be 603,000 residents. That's about just under a 2% increase from the prior year. General fund, we're talking about an increase of really less than 1% from our final budget that we filed a year ago at this time. So it's no increase in our final budget. And as you recall, one of the things we did back in our budget workshop is we made a budget adjustment, or we reduced our current year general fund budget by $20 million. So if you look at the revised budget that we have for '07 compared to what we're forecasting now for '08, it's about a 4.7% increase in operating expenses. I'd like to review the capital first before we get into the operating. Just as a reminder, when we met on May 2nd and talked about this $20 million that we had in additional revenues, we made some allocations at that time, some decisions were made, or some direction was given, and this is how we allocated those funds. The reductions in $5.1 million, if you recall, we did several things. We decided that Centennial Hills Park Phase 3, there was some RCT, residential construction tax revenue, that was there that we could reallocate. We also made a decision with respect to revising our budgets for our fire stations, and we were able to reallocate money there. So that's what those reductions are for. The other represents about 14 other projects. So the math here is about 16, 17 projects that we've added to our capital project list. Now this is in addition to the $22.9 million that we already talked about at our budget hearing on March 16th. There were two fire projects and 4 metro facility projects that we had already approved. I think Dr. Selby mentioned that we have quite a bit of work in process. We still have about $440 million of work in process and capital. Parks and Leisure, Road and Flood constitutes 65% of that total. So we've got quite a bit that's in process. I will.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
I can't. The writing on my screen is very dull. I can't see it. Got it. Oh, well, thank you.
Certainly. I'll mention it here, and I'll mention it again. One of the things that we learned from the exercise we just went through at the 3 previous meetings is that perhaps our capital project plan needs to be reviewed more frequently than once a year at the budget. So one of the things you'll see that we're adding in our budget policies is to have a 6-month review of our capital project plan, so we can see what the status of those projects are. Are they moving along? If they're not, why aren't they? And if they're idle, gives you an opportunity to decide to reallocate those funds to some other project that's ready to go. Talking about the operating situation, as Dr. Selby mentioned, we're talking about adding 27 new positions now. It sounds like a lot of positions, but the caveat here is there are cost reductions or new revenues that are paying for these 27 positions. This is not an increase in terms of the net increase to the budget we filed as a tentative budget. How we're paying for those, there's 7 vacant positions that, meeting with the city manager's office, we decided can be eliminated or reprogrammed. That's about $624,000 in revenue. And then all the other positions, the 2 customer service rep positions will be funded by revenues, and I'll talk about that in a second. And then the balance of the firefighter, paramedic, and the city marshal positions will actually be funded through reductions in overtime. You recall we had a lot of discussion about overtime and some of the total compensation that certain individuals were making. It was in the paper, and we have been working diligently with both the city marshals and the fire department to try to figure out, is there a way that we can add positions that will pay for themselves by reduction in overtime. We think we've gotten there, and we'll show you what that is in a second here. With respect to Floyd Lamb at Tule Springs, just for complete disclosure, we're looking at $209,000 of new revenues as a result of that park. The entrance fees are only going to be achieved if we control entrance and have someone at the gate. The leases, which is the gun club and the equestrian lease, and the other is primarily a large group usage fees. We're going to get those revenues regardless of whether we have someone manning the gate. But the $172,000 of revenue is contingent upon spending the $197,000 for 2 customer service reps and 8 part-timers in order to have that that gate manned dawn to dusk, 7 days a week. So in a big picture, from our perspective, certainly there are new revenues that will pay for the cost of providing this function, which I believe we've discussed it before. There's a feeling that there's a need for some security measures, if you will, and while these are not security people, charging a fee at a gate is a way of discouraging some folks that maybe don't want to pay the $6 to get into the park, so to do other nefarious kinds of things. So I know that that was a discussion we've had before, but this is a plan here that would allow us to add these positions without any additional cost to the city.
Your Honor, if I may.
Yes, certainly, Councilman.
And just for my colleagues on the council, I was out there this weekend, and the park was absolutely packed with families out there enjoying the wonderful weather this last weekend. It's important to recognize the great usage that park receives, and once it is ours, and we do some improvements to it, I expect it to be that way almost every weekend. There were kids fishing, there were families picnicking, and it was good to see that. Every parking lot was full, and I drove around the entire park, so it was good to see that. Mr. Vincent, I don't want you to discount our Park Ambassador program as well, and I want my colleagues to recognize that great asset that we have, volunteers that go out there and in several of our parks throughout the city and volunteer their time to be those park ambassadors, because there's some wonderful people that do that, and I think we're going to find that there's going to be more who are going to want to participate in that program.
Thank you.
I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about overtime. As I indicated earlier, it's been something we've been struggling with, and I just want to make a couple of points, because you can oversimplify the idea of what overtime is and how you make decisions about whether or not overtime is good or bad. Generally speaking, I will tell you from the financial perspective, overtime is not a bad thing, and it is an effective way, a very cost-effective way of getting additional resources to cover special events or even some routine needs. The concern always is, from our perspective, not so much a financial one. The concern is the distribution of the overtime. Is everyone getting an equitable, fair opportunity to earn that overtime? And the other question is, to the extent that not everyone wants to work overtime, so there are going to be some folks that don't get overtime because they wish not to get it, and there are going to be other folks that want to work a lot of overtime, and they'll get more overtime than the others as a result of those differences of positions and desires. But the issue is, we still have a concern, and I know management has a concern, the fire management of fire department and detention enforcement have a concern that we make sure people don't work too many back-to-back shifts, so we have an issue of safety or quality of the job. So management's supposed to manage that. That's the issue. So the reason why overtime is cost-effective is primarily because if it's pure overtime, you're paying time and a half. You're paying a 50% premium on the labor for the time worked. Whereas if you have to hire a new body, you have to bring that body in, you have to train them. In this case, you've got to run through an academy. You have to give them, if they're a marshal, you have to give them a car. That car has to be depreciated and replaced periodically, probably every 3 years at least, with the miles that they put on them. We also have issue with, they bring with them all new benefits. If you already have somebody here who's got insurance coverage and we've already paid the PERS on their base salary, we don't have to pay the PERS on the overtime if it's regular overtime. But if we bring a new body in, we have to pay PERS on that. And so if I can, without boring you with too many details, if we look at the marshals, for example, through March, year to date, we've spent 14,889 hours of overtime at a cost of $722,000 and change. If you do the math, that's an average of $48.52 per hour. That's what the overtime on average cost us. If you look at the cost of a second-year marshal, and I use second year because the first year you're in the academy for 6 months and you're going to rat along, you're not really going to get the productive necessarily on-the-job time for a while. But if you look at that, they're not available for 2,080 hours. If they're working four tens, they're working 40 hours a week, that's 2,080 hours. They're not going to be here 2,080 hours. They're going to be sick. They're going to be on vacation. They're going to be on training. Things are going to happen. And we believe on average, out of a 2,080-hour year, they're going to be here about 1,744 hours productive on the job. but I'm going to pay them their salary, I'm going to pay them their benefits, and there's going to be some support costs. And if you do that math, that all comes out to $54.60 an hour, which is slightly higher than the $48 that we're already paying for the overtime. So again, overtime in itself is not a bad thing. The issue and concern is equity and safety and quality of the work that we're doing. So that's the issue.
Okay, Councilman Brown.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mark, through March, is that through this fiscal year?
Yes. Yes, these are current year numbers. It might even be April, but I think it's March.
Can I comment on that, Your Honor?
Certainly.
Mark, you and I have talked about this in regards to there comes that line where we're paying so much for the overtime when actually hiring new staff members, regardless if they're marshals or firefighters, it gets below that line. And I don't see that here. It looks like we're below that line now, the way these numbers look.
In other words, what you're saying is with the marshals, it looks like it's still cheaper to pay the overtime than it is to bring on the new bodies. Is that what you're saying?
That's what I'm saying. But now if we continue to give them more and more overtime, we hit that line of demarcation that says, hey, here's the line that we can actually hire some more marshals.
Right.
Same thing with our firefighters. You know, our firefighters work a lot of overtime as well, but there comes that line of demarcation where all of a sudden it's actually cost effective for the city to hire those new bodies and put them in those new positions.
I think the answer to your question, I'm still not sure I'm tracking you clearly, but the answer to your question is that from a financial perspective, when you look at this kind of analysis, and of course we're talking about some groups here, the marshals and the firefighters have a little higher benefits than the rest of us. Their PERS benefits 50% higher, more than 50% higher. They're at 33.5. The rest of the city's at 20.5. So to do that math, it's more than 50% higher. So this group's benefit situation is different than, say, regular employees. And so the math works out differently for them. That's why you can't make a broad statement that says, you know, overtime's always bad or always good. You have to look at the specific situation. In this case, and actually in the fire case as well, but I'll get there in a second, I think this is close enough that if we've got a commitment from in this case, our chief, director of detention enforcement, that they feel that they can fund 5 additional positions, reducing the overtime a concurrent amount. In fact, if you just let me slip to that.
Well, let me ask you a question, if I may, Councilman Ross. What causes the overtime? No, I know there's special events, and you may need a couple more bodies out there for the special events, but ordinarily, what causes the overtime?
The largest thing that would cause the overtime is unless you staff completely to not only to fill all the posts that you have in the case of a marshals or a detention, staff them all, then you have to hire additional staff to fill up for that vacancy. Remember I said you don't get 2,080 hours of work, you only get 1,700 hours. So if you do the math, if you say if we could eliminate all of the overtime, if it was possible to eliminate all the overtime as just a hypothesis, based upon the vacancy factors, we would have to hire 8.5 additional marshals theoretically to eliminate the overtime that we're seeing so far. Now, it's not possible to eliminate all the overtime because there are special events, and sometimes there are peaks. When we talk about average vacancies, we understand that average isn't achieved every day. Some day we've got high vacancies, some day we have low vacancies, and the high vacancies are days that you have to use overtime to fill them. You don't have enough bodies. So it becomes a management issue. We don't fund enough positions to cover all of the expected vacancies, and we certainly don't fund enough positions to cover the special events and those sorts of things.
Mayor, if I could, I guess I'm just getting more confused. You mean we have positions or posts where the marshals are supposed to be? We'll say we have 101 positions where these marshals are supposed to be, and we only have 82 marshals hired.
No.
So we're paying overtime for the other 19 positions.
No, what I'm saying is if there's 100 posts that the marshals have to be at, and we hired 100 marshals, you're going to be, on average, you're going to be 16 short every day because they're going to be on vacation, sick, training. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, it's not,
It's
Not a constant.
you're using vacancy, I think.
I'm
that's a little
sorry,
bit
you're right. There is time worked on the job, and there's paid time off. Everybody gets paid time off. And we lose sight of the fact that when you hire somebody and you say, this guy's salary is, $2,000, and he works 2,000 hours a year, it's a dollar an hour. Well, it's not, because he's only going to be on the job 1,700 hours. He's not going to be here when he's on leave, on vacation, sick, and holiday. So, and we have fairly generous benefits, very competitive benefits. So we have our ratio of time worked on the job versus how many hours they're scheduled to work is a little lower.
So the differential is then made up by those who
Overtime
are
where you hire
working and want to do
position.
the overtime. They fill in for those who are on the vacations and
Right.
sick leave.
Your Honor,
Yes.
2,080, did you say, is the work year?
If you're working a regular shift, doesn't work. I mean, if you're working a regular 40-hour week work week.
So if the city hired one marshal, that's all we need. We're still going to be 336 hours short that someone has to replace for that one marshal.
Right. If you wanted to hire one more marshal to have one more patrol, first of all, you have to recognize you have 7 times 2 shifts a week, so you got 14 shifts a week, and you divide the 14 shifts by they're only going to be there for 5, so you all of a sudden got to hire 3 guys to cover 1 shift, and oh, by the way, they're going to be missing 16% of the time, so you got to hire a fraction to cover the 16% of the time the 3 aren't going to be there. Well, you can't hire a fourth of 40% of a marshal. So how are you going to fill it? Overtime. How are you going to fill it?
Mayor Goodman.
Yes.
Mark, the statistics I'm looking at right now, the through March of fiscal '07, is that a typical statistic on an annual basis, or is this atypical?
For detention, for the marshals, I think it's been growing slightly, is my recollection. I think there's been more pressure put on them for events.
But it's not uncommon to have these number of overtime hours every year.
No, it is not.
So it's part of good fiscal planning,
Yes, it is.
subject to your equity of distribution and safety quality concern issues, to understaff post-wise. I'm going to use the term shift, because rather than have a body available 24/7 for all these shifts or posts, fiscally it's better to position these, recognizing that we can make up for it in overtime from a fiscal standpoint.
Generally, that's correct.
Okay.
So if I move on with the marshals, again, our recommendation is that there is a need. We would like to have more marshals on the job. There's certainly a need for that. In talking with detention and enforcement, they believe that they can absorb $195,000 out of their overtime for next year to pay for these 5 marshals. And it's a half a year, because for 5 marshals, we're not going to run our own academy. So we're going to join in with another city's academy, and I think one scheduled in January of '08. And so you're only talking about half a year impact here is what we're talking about. So if that makes sense, that's what we're recommending. Firefighter, paramedic overtime. This gets to be a little more confusion, because the firemen don't work a regular 40-hour work week. They work in terms of shifts. We talk in terms of a 24-hour shift. Through March, firefighter paramedics work 7,848 shifts of overtime, totaling $7,620,000. If you do that math, it's $971 per shift. That's what it's costing us on average. A second-year firefighter paramedic is going to cost us less than that. It's going to cost us about $888 per shift. And how we get to that, and again, we think there's going to be about 93 productive shifts that, based upon paid absences, the sick leave, the vacation, the holiday pay, the training time, because they do have to go on training, and when they're on training, they're not necessarily at their normal fire station.
But what does the 93 mean?
That's how many shifts. It's just a mathematical calculation. It's like it's equivalent to this. It's a kind of. If I can help you with, maybe I can. If I got caught up with myself, I could answer your question. Typically, we talk about 122 shifts a year. A firefighter would normally work about 122. If he was here for all the time and never took any leave, never got sick, never took a holiday, they would be here for about 122 shifts, but on average, they're only going to be here about 93 shifts because they're going to be absent. So, interesting enough, to eliminate all the overtime that we had seen to date, we'd have to add 84. Theoretically, again, if we could do it, which is not really possible, but if theoretically, if the world was perfect and you could just hire more firefighters to cover it, you'd have to hire 84 new firefighters to eliminate that overtime. It's just obviously not a feasible thing to do. So again, second-year firefighter, the salary I'm estimating at $48,859, which includes upcoming cost of living adjustment and a step. Benefits on that would be almost $29,000. Support costs $5,000. You do that math, that's $888 a shift. So it is slightly cheaper. In this case, to hire a new firefighter to supplant the average cost of the overtime. So what we're recommending here, a couple other things. I wanted to clarify, in the last meeting, we talked about Rescue 48, and I understand that Rescue 48 is actually in Academy now, so we actually have Rescue 48 covered. We don't need additional positions for that. Currently, contractually, through the collective bargaining agreement, there are 18 sick leave shifts per day and 18 annual shifts per day and 2 sick leave shifts per day that are guaranteed in the contract. So if you add those up, that's 20 shifts per day that per contract are going to be vacant. We just know they're going to be vacant. We're currently averaging over 31 shifts per day vacant, which is about 20% vacancy factor. That's another interesting stat. The vacancy factor in the fire department is a little higher, possibly because, you know, the kind of work that they do, and particularly in the rescue unit, the EMS, some of the overtime that's there can be pretty taxing on folks. So for whatever reason, that's what it is. Our recommendation is to take the 7 vacant positions that we have and reallocate those to fire and rescue. That's about $624,000. We're talking about adding 20 firefighter paramedics, probably in an October academy, so we're only talking about 3/4 of a year. That 20 equates to the 20 positions that we're guaranteed are going to be off the floor at any given day. And the balance of that's going to have to be picked up in overtime reduction. And we believe, in talking with the fire department, that they have the tools necessary to manage some of the other vacancies. They can make decisions about where they deploy units and how they deploy units. And in order for this to work, mathematically, in order to have the cost savings and the overtime, they have to manage those vacant units a little differently than they have in the past, which I believe they can do. They have agreed that they can do it. They're more than willing to do it.
Is that without sacrificing the excellent public safety that they provide?
I don't want to speak for the fire department, but in our discussions, that was always a major issue, is are we doing something here that's going to sacrifice the quality of service or endanger anybody? And the answer that I've always gotten is no. They believe they can do it without.
Chief?
Good morning. For the record, Dave Washington, Fire Chief, Las Vegas Fire and Rescue. No, we don't believe that it would sacrifice anything. We operate daily from 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, generally sometimes on Saturday at 75% strength. And that's because we can't operate like Metro, where they bring their folks in off time, pay them overtime to train. Our folks are on duty when we train them, so we have to take some units out of service. That has been the tradition and a long-standing way of the fire department operating. And we see no other way to do it but to take some units out of service to train.
Right, but no sacrifice as to the quality of public safety.
We don't believe so.
All right, because that's important. Thank you.
So this is our recommendation for fire and rescue. And that's how we plan to make them whole in their budget. So as a recap here, we're talking about revenue of about $551.7 million. Expenditures of $548.9. We are doing some transfers this year. As you know, at the end of every year, we identify the need to transfer some revenue out of the general fund into capital projects fund. We've talked about how we were funding, on March 16th, we talked about how we were funding the Metro request and how we're funding the fire project requests with transfers. Based on what we just did on May 2nd, this is an additional need to transfer out revenues. So we're looking at a net reduction in our fund balance after the expenditures and after the transfers out. There's a net reduction in fund balance of $6.5 million. That gets our fund balance down to about $69 million, including a $4 million reserve for the Metropolitan Police Department liability that we have an agreement with the finance director of the county that rather than give them the cash to fund their liability for Metro, both workers' comp and liability reserves, they're self-funded, that we would just set aside a reserve of our general fund money to do that and not actually give them the cash, and they've agreed to that. So when you do that math, that gets our fund balance down to a little over 12%. I think it's about 12.6% of our revenues, which is within our budget guidelines. Our budget guidelines say we will maintain a fund balance of 12%. And so that we're pretty much there. So the picture again, just for those who like pictures, you can see consolidated taxes. Dr. Selby mentioned earlier is about 53% of our revenue. We talked about we're anticipating that to grow from 07 actuals to 08. We're expecting about a 4% growth in that, which is in line with what the state is recommending from their economic forum.
Where do we see that? Where do we see that, Mr. Vincent? The 4% growth.
You don't see it on this chart. I'm just saying that red pie, that 53%, that portion of our total revenue is growing at the rate of 4%.
But it says the C-tax decreased by 2.5%. Am I missing something?
And that's based upon our final budget from. I'm confusing you, and I see that. Yes, the final budget we filed in 2007 had a budget of $287.3 million. We just revised that budget down. Remember when we met on March 16th? We revised that down. We essentially took about $17 million out of it and revised that down to $269 million for 07. Now the new budget for 08 is $280 million. So if you compare the $280 million budget for 08 to the $287 original budget for 07, that's actually a decrease of 2.5% from final budget to final budget. And all we're saying is that's the impact of what happened in 07. That's why we reduced our budget by $20 million in March 16th. Now, as we go from that new revised budget into 08, we'll have a new baseline, and so the growth rate on that is going to be a moderate 4%. Sorry for that confusion. On the expenditure side, as you know, 60% of our expenditures are going to public safety. As a result of some either revenues or reductions in costs, we're able to reallocate 27 positions, primarily to fire and detention. I'd like to take a moment to talk about the redevelopment agency. It's probably one of the few bright spots in the budget this year. We had budgeted for I think it was $11.7 million in revenue, tax increment revenue for 2007, and the actual numbers are coming in at over $16 million. That's a 40% increase in tax increment revenues in the redevelopment area in 07 over 06. Now, we're required to use the state's forecasted taxes for the redevelopment agency, and they're only forecasting 16.2. I believe that it's going to come in higher than that, but that's the budget that they've given us. So within that budget, we're able to cover the debt service. We're able to cover the affordable housing set-aside. That's the 18% set-aside required by state law for affordable housing. That goes to our affordable housing special revenue. And then we have $20 million in various projects. Now, of that $20 million, about 1.6 is RDA operations, some of OBD, Office of Business Development staff is funded out of the RDA. So the balance, roughly about 18.5 million is in various projects. Probably the largest project on the list is the Fifth Street School remodel is in there. We have some plans for land acquisition. We have the Las Vegas Visitor Center and the downtown area. And there's a few other projects, but that's essentially what it is. So that's sort of a bright spot for us. And as I wrap up here, I do have the Citizens Priority Advisory Council did meet. I mentioned we did talk about our budget policies. We did add a budget policy under the capital project section that will now require us to do a 6-month review of capital projects. Again, we talked about that earlier, but that's so that we keep a handle on those projects and keep you advised of where we are, and allows you to make mid-year corrections rather than wait to the end of the year. So I think that'll be a good thing, and I do have the letter here I'll give to the clerk that the members did sign.
Could you pass that? Could you pass that up, Ms. Bridges? Thanks.
And finally, the Nevada Department of Taxation did accept our tentative budget that was filed with them, and we expect that they'll be fine with our final budget. And with that, I'll available for any questions you may have about the budget.
All right, thank you, Mr. Vincent. Are there any questions of Mr. Vincent?
Just a comment.
Yes.
You know, I sat here and listened to Mr. Vincent's report, and it seems to me like he's really taken to heart what he's heard in our strategic planning meetings. And I just want to tell Mark, for me, that I think he does a fantastic job in the city of Las Vegas, and I think we're in good hands with Mark as our boss here.
Well, I accept that comment, but I'll pass it along to all the people that do all the work. I'm more or less a talking head at this point.
You're the leader, though.
No, I really want to thank Candy and Vanetta and their staff, and I want to thank all the department. I mean, this is really a collaborative effort. You can't put together a budget like this without working closely with the city manager's office, with all the department heads. The things we make them go through are unbelievable at times, and I really appreciate all their support. And I think we're trying very, very diligently to listen and to be responsive and do the best we can, and give you the best advice we can. I know we don't always agree. Sometimes my advice is a little contrary to what you may wish you could do, but that's my job. So I appreciate the comment. Thank you, Councilman.
Mr.
Yes, Councilwoman.
If I could just quickly. I just wanted to second what Councilman Reese said. I asked you questions so that I could give information to people who are asking me questions on why we use overtime and what are the benefits of it. And you did a great job in putting this all together, and I really appreciate that. And now when the questions are asked, I have something concrete that I can give them. It's and maybe you have a superlative staff. You also have a great leader in that department.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Councilman Wilson?
Yes, sir, thank you. My kudos to you as well, Mark, echoing my colleagues' comments. But I realize that you had help, because when I called you on those Saturday mornings or Saturday afternoons, I got the impression that you had to make a couple of phone calls to your staff people. So my congratulations to your staff and all of the departments in the city of Las Vegas, because I know one phone call to you, Mark, may trigger 3 or 4 or 5 phone calls to other departments when I sought information and received it in a very timely fashion. So I want to thank you and everybody in the city that responded to all of us. I also want to thank my colleagues for working together so well on this process. And Councilman Ross, my thanks to you for working with me on matters that are important to all of us, and to your ward and to my ward and to all of the wards. So thank you all very much.
Do I take those comments by Councilman Wilson to mean that you don't know everything?
You know, Mayor, there's so sign of intelligence is knowing what you don't know. There's so much I don't know. I prefer just to shut up.
Okay, any other
Mayor?
comment? Yes, Councilman.
Yes. I'd like to thank Mr. Vincent for being so patient with me and explaining budgetary items and the way things work, because I really had just a slight bit of information, but something of this magnitude to try and digest in just a few sessions. I just want to take my hat off to you, because you worked diligently with me, and I appreciate that.
Thank you. Anybody else? Any council members? All right, this is a public hearing, ladies and gentlemen. Anybody from the public like to be heard at this time?
Mr. Mayor, Council, good morning. My name is Ted Russell. I'm a resident of Las Vegas. During my years of AT&T, if you think we have it rough here, in AT&T, every hour you worked over 48 was double time. So I have some expertise on the overtime dilemma, and sometimes it appears to be a quagmire. It gets fraught with controversy. I think our solution is rather ingenious. I do thank Mr. Vincent, and also I thank Dr. Selby. I have every confidence that we are doing a great deal with very little, and I can't thank you enough.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to be heard at the public hearing?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
If I could just emphasize, and I know Mark has heard this before, but in this year's budget, we weren't able to increase the code enforcement officers, and I know they're stretched very, very far right now. And in fact, the area that I inherited in the redistricting from Councilman Brown, we went several months without having anybody to help us in that area. So what I'm asking is, when you start thinking about next year, which you'll probably start thinking very soon, if not already, would you just remember that great need that we have, particularly in the older districts? I know Councilman Williams had mentioned that also.
Thank you. All right, anybody else? Then we'll close the public hearing. May I have a motion on item 1, please?
Yes, Your Honor, I move for approval, following staff's recommendation.
All right, let's vote, please. Post. Motion carries, and a motion on item 2, please.
Same motion for the same reason.
All right, let's vote, please. Post. Motion carries. Thank you. Now we'll move on to citizens' participation. Citizens' participation. Public comment during this portion of the agenda must be limited to matters within the jurisdiction of the City Council. No subject may be acted upon by the City Council unless that subject is on the agenda and is scheduled for action. If you'd like to be heard, please come on up. Be happy to hear from you. Put a 3-minute timer on.
Good morning again. My name is Ted Russell. I'm a resident of Las Vegas. Recently, an excellent editorial by Mr. Greenspun. Suddenly, it seems like everybody's saying they did not vote for this governor. This governor is a friend and a partner of City of Las Vegas. It is incumbent on all of us, due to the structure of our governments, that we do support our governor. And he certainly has my backing. Also, I would like to give a commendation to Andy Wilson of Metro for her nascent efforts on the behalf of the homeless in working with Metro. 1 year is not much time to get a great deal done. She's got a good start. I've noticed significant improvements in the state of the city jail. I'll be emailing all those concerned to give you my thanks and my critique. That's all I have right now. Once again, thank you.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to be heard? Okay, ladies and gentlemen, this coming Saturday at 7:30 in the morning up at the Kellogg Zaire Park, we're going to have a walk with the mayor. It's going to be a free event. It's going to start at 8 o'clock, but registration will start at 7:30. Everybody, the first 250 people will get a free T-shirt, and as part of our health program here and wellness program here in the city. And then, of course, that evening, we have a very special El Dorado parade. First time to my memory that it's an evening event. It begins at 7 o'clock at 4th and Charleston, and we'd like everybody to please be there. Bring your kids, your grandkids, your relatives, and your friends, because it's going to be a very special event. I think just about every council member, with the exception of myself, will be riding horseback.
No. Me and you guys. Me and you. We ain't gonna ride no horse either.
Oh, okay.
Oh, that's 3 of us that are not.
I think, let me just amend that. I think one person will be riding horseback, and I'll be in a stagecoach carrying a shotgun looking for people who will be painting graffiti along the way.
Mayor Goodman. I'm going to get fired for this.
Yeah, that's a good idea. And maybe we'll all wear Western clothes to remind people that to the council meeting tomorrow.
How are you doing in your
Tomorrow.
wellness program on the weight loss
Terrific.
goal that you
I lost a large portion of my belly already.
Excellent.
Yeah, I'm very, very pleased.
When do we
with-
start to see the results? Soon? Am I fired?
Let me put it, it's a shot, okay. But the shot went right over the bow, because I'll tell you, I was shocked on Saturday night. My wife had to make a little speech out at the Red Rock for Summerlin Youth Program, and I know I drank an awful lot, but this was like an apparition. I saw a council member, I'm not going to say whom, walking around in underwear, trying to catch a cab. Okay? Meeting's adjourned.